Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this deep dive into Rioja. I'll give everyone just a moment to join, who's joining from home. Again, welcome. I think we're now officially live. My name is Vanessa Conlin, Master of Wine and Head of Wine at Wine Access, and I'm delighted that you've joined us from home today on this deep dive into Rioja, and absolutely thrilled that we have these two esteemed panelists that I will introduce in just a moment. But we'll give folks just a minute to log on. I'm going to open my chat and also the Q&A so that I can see any questions that come in. Please, this is meant to be interactive. So if there are any questions that come up during the next 55 minutes or so that we have together, please enter them either in the chat or the Q&A. I'll be monitoring both, and we will get to as many of your questions from home as we can. And my colleague, Naomi, who's also in the chat, will be posting links to these beautiful wines that we'll be tasting today as well. So again, for anyone who just joined, thank you so much for joining. My name is Vanessa Conlin. I'm delighted that you've joined us today on this webinar from Wine Access. If you haven't visited us before, you can find us at wineaccess.com. We're also on Instagram at Wine Access, on Facebook at the Wine Access Experience. And if you like podcasts, we have a podcast called Wine Access Unfiltered, which you can find in any place you would listen to podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, etc. So without further ado, I'd really love to welcome our panelists today. Thank you so much to Gloria and Jesus. And I know it's excruciating to hear your own bios read aloud, but you're quite extraordinary, both of you. So allow me just for a moment to read these bios, and then we'll dive in. Gloria Zapatero. Gloria Zapatero is Regional Manager for Arano Import Company, with an MBA specialization in international trade. She worked for Cune Winery as the United States Export Manager since 2013. In 2012, before starting with Cune, she was working for Wines from Spain at the Spain's Trade Commission in New York, assisting wineries to export to the US market and organizing events to promote the wines of Spain. In 2017, she switched to Arano as the Regional Manager in charge of over 20 states in the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, and part of the Central region. She has been constantly developing the presence of Arano wines in the market, enhancing the relationship with our customers, and promoting with events, tastings, and wine dinners. Welcome, Gloria. So delighted to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Next, Jesus Pereño from El Centimo. Literally growing up between the vines, Jesus is from a family of grape growers in the Rioja region of Spain, more specifically Rioja Alta. We'll talk more about those different places as we have this discussion, but much of his young life was spent helping his dad with different activities in the vineyards. A mechanical engineer by trade, Jesus has spent his professional career in the wine packaging industry in a global company. He has been working in every wine region in Spain, in France, some in France, like Bordeaux and Cognac, and he was transferred to Napa in 2009 and has worked with some of the most well-known wineries in the United States. He studied at Napa Valley College in the winemaking program and has been making wine since 2010 from Rioja, a red blend from 2010, and a white Tempranillo from 2018 and 2019. Currently, he lives in Napa, my hometown, and travels to Spain to work on these wines. He met a beautiful wife that works in the wine industry as well, and together they have an amazing family. On a separate note, Jesus is excited to be working on a premium Napa cab for the 2018 and 2019 vintages. So welcome. Normally I would be dialing in from Napa with you. I'm in New York, so please pardon any traffic noises that are floating in from outside my hotel window. But again, thanks everyone for joining from home. Do remember to drop in questions into the chat and the Q&A so we can cover them. We'll get started with questions in just a moment, but I wanted to just give a brief overview of Rioja. So it's a landlocked region in north central Spain, known for aging their wines for extended periods of time before released. They have hot summers and cold winters protected from strong northern Atlantic winds by the Cantabrian Mountains. There's a major river that runs through it, the Ebro, as well as 7 smaller rivers. There are 3 major regions, Rioja Alta, Rioja Alavesa, and Rioja Oriental, which was formerly known as Rioja Baja. Alta and Alavesa are slightly cooler and higher elevation with a longer growing season. Wine has been made in Rioja for thousands of years, but it came to prominence in the late 1800s when a vineyard pest called phylloxera, which many of you have, I'm sure, are familiar with, was destroying the vineyards in France and in places like Bordeaux in particular. And wine drinkers from these regions realized that Rioja was a wonderful and viable alternative. And while it's never attained quite the fame of Bordeaux, that's allowed prices to actually remain quite reasonable from the region. So when we're talking about red wines, of course, the main red grape is Tempranillo, which can be blended with Garnacha, Graciano, or Mazuelo. And the main white grape is Viura, which can be blended with Malvasia and Garnacha Blanca. We're going to talk about some newer varieties that are permitted now as of 2017, a little further in the conversation. But one of the hallmarks of Rioja has always been the aging before release. So the wine is ready to drink in its prime. And something I definitely want to delve into more deeply during this next several minutes with you is these updated laws that were updated in 2017. So please, everyone at home and panelists, pardon my pronunciation. I am not a fluent speaker of Spanish, so, but I believe something like this, saber quién eres, which I think translates to know who you are. These new laws had a couple of sort of major updates. One is that sparkling Rioja is now actually permitted, whereas before it would have been labeled cava. Rioja can now list the village or municipality on the label. With white wines, with white Rioja, Chardonnay, and Sauvignon Blanc are now permitted. There were changes to the aging requirements for Reserva and Gran Reserva. And I think what's most important or most distinct is that single vineyard wines or viñedos singulares, again, please excuse my pronunciation, are now allowed and sort of intending to showcase individual terroirs. And these, though, can also be used in conjunction with the existing quality tiers. So there's so much to discuss here. It's almost really kind of hard to know where to start, but I think maybe history is a great starting point. So Jesus, if you wouldn't mind taking this first question, which is about sort of Rioja and its connection with Bordeaux. So sort of what implications did that have on sort of the winemaking traditions in the region?
So the main winemaking practices that we've seen in history that there are records of winemaking story around the 1,000 years, something like that. So it was around like the 1800 when phylloxera hit France, mainly the area of Bordeaux. It was when a lot of people or wineries from there, they were moving to Rioja. That implemented all this kind of a style of winemaking. I will say around like the 1800s. And that impacted a lot in the style. I mean, but Gloria knows for sure because she belongs to a winery that historically it was there.
I mean, all this was the very beginning, actually. Bordeaux has a great influence in everything related to Rioja, because, I mean, I don't know what history would have gone if phylloxera never existed in France at the but the fact is that it existed, and it made Bordeaux incapable of producing wine for a while. So they saw all these French merchants and these French winemakers saw the opportunity in Rioja as an alternative to actually this region, and they adapted this exceptional region for winemaking and for grape growing, and they took all their knowledge of long aging and finesse and balance that they were using into their wines, and they put it into the wines of Rioja. So I think that Bordeaux and Rioja is super connected from the very beginning, and of course Rioja took its own path and its own like soul with the years, but in the end all that impact that it had in the wines, it's still showing nowadays with these amazing jewels that Rioja has to show.
And Gloria, sticking with you for the next question as well, which is given that wine has been made in Rioja for thousands of years, what we just talked about in the intro, some recent changes as well, including to the law, and knowing consumer preferences have changed over the last thousands of years, certainly. How do you balance tradition with innovation?
Well, tradition is always a respected attribute to historical wineries like Cune. It's our key part. Not many wineries in the world can successfully say that they have kept tradition since the very beginnings. And I think it's one of the key factors for that. I mean, it's one of the key factors of Cune that has been, for instance, in the same hands, in the same family for 5 generations already. We love consistency, we love tradition, and again, not many wineries in the world has been in the same hands for that long, and that something that shows in the soul of every of our wines. However, innovation is really important, and actually, Cune has always been one of the most innovative, historically speaking. We were one of the first ones to actually introduce the use of gravity into winemaking, for instance, something that nowadays seems like something that it's common sense that everybody uses because it actually helps the manageability of a winery itself. But again, back in the beginning of the 1900s, that would be something that would blow everybody's mind. So innovation and tradition has always been like holding hands. And I really think that nobody should ever, moreover, like traditional wineries like us, should never forget about tradition, but innovation is a key. For instance, all these organic certifications, it's another innovation coming into wine, right? Sustainability is something that has always been there, and we are also one of the pioneers trying to work towards organic certifications, and something that we are pioneers now. In the future, I hope everybody will be driven towards that way. So it's just a matter of like evolving, right?
Absolutely. So Jesus, if I could direct this next question to you, which is again sort of talking about the history of the region and the impact it's had on the style of the wine. I think, of course, many of us associate Rioja with the use of American oak. So could you speak a bit to that? How did that first begin, and how relevant is that today?
So for the wines that we are making, we are using around like 40% American oak, and the rest it is French oak. It has been a very traditional, as you said, like American oak in all the Rioja wines. How we impact that in the wine, I think that it works really good with the Tempranillo. Some of the characteristics that you can get out of it is like those vanilla flavors. I think that it creates a really well-balanced wine. Mainly those American oaks, they were coming from Kentucky or that areas over there.
Do you find though that are is it a trend to veer away from that in sort of modern production?
In our situation, we always try to taste each individual lot, and we don't have anything like determined exactly like we want to use this amount of French oak or this amount of American oak. I think what it makes sense for us at this point, it is like once we ensemble the final blend, that is what it is making sense, at least for us.
Got it. And what about at Cune, Gloria?
I mean, American oak has always been part of our tradition again. We are one of the most traditional and historical wineries from Rioja, so American oak is a part of our soul. Actually, the Cune wine, the Cune Reserva, is made almost about, like most of it about American oak. But we have different wines that we produce, including French oak. It's just a matter of style, depending on each wine. American oak was part of the very beginning of Rioja as a wine region, so it took some time to actually evolve towards actually having some French oak added to it because of style of the wine. But in the end, it's again a matter of style. So it depends on what the winemaker is trying to get out of the wine and out of the vineyards, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends. But there's definitely a more modern style, including much more French oak.
Yes. Well, I'm asking. I know we have several students of wine who are studying blind tasting, etc. And I think it's important distinction to make that just looking for American oak on a wine to place it in Rioja is not a key marker anymore, right? Or is not going to point you there definitively. So let's say taking oak out of the picture. If you were blind tasting, Gloria, we'll start with you, blind tasting a red wine from Rioja, what would be some of the characteristics that you might expect, and how do the different varieties play into that?
Well, first, the blends, the traditional Rioja blend, as I like to explain to every time that I do an event here in the US, the traditional Rioja blend is Tempranillo, mainly with Garnacha, Mazuelo, and Graciano. It's the blend that made us famous as a region, and most of the wineries kept it that way. It's the key, the successful key, right? The Tempranillo, it's a really amazing grape that has, I'll say, cherry, plum flavors involved into dried fig. You can definitely get some zither, leather, tobacco, and influence from the oak too. The tannins are going to be like medium-ish, medium plus tannins, and the acidity medium minus, I'll say, acidity for the Tempranillo. However, the influence of Garnacha, Mazuelo, and Graciano, it's super remarked. Well, the Garnacha adds a lot of fruitiness to the blend. The Mazuelo, it's the one that adds much more color and acidity, and the Graciano gives a lot of perfume and acidity too. As you said, the oak is not a huge mark anymore, like American oak used only in Rioja, but it's definitely a huge flavor profile of balance, elegance in the wines of Rioja, roundness with a lot of complexity coming to it, but again, really, really balanced. It's like there's nothing popping like huge that it stands from the rest of the flavors. They're masterpieces, to be honest.
Yes. And Jesus, if I could ask the same question of you, but in regards to the white varieties, say Viura, Garnacha Blanca, what do you think that those individual grape varieties bring to the blend, and how would you pick those out of a glass if you were blind tasting?
So, for example, for the red that we are making is the Tempranillo, Garnacha, and Graciano. In our situation, I mean, a traditional blend in Rioja, I will say is around like 85% of Tempranillo and the rest of Garnacha, Graciano, Mazuelo. In our situation, we were only using like 60% of Tempranillo. Around like 20% of Garnacha and 20% of Graciano. As Gloria was describing, it is like, those are little masterpieces that you try to put together to try to make like the final blend, like the more rounded, balance, and try to get those kind of like smooth tannins with a long finish. Sometimes, for example, in my opinion, when we taste like old vintages, like 20 to 30 years old vintages with old Cabernet, old Tempranillo, there are lots of similarities. They tend to age like really good.
Got it. And Gloria, do you want to speak to I was curious about the white varieties and how you might, or Jesus, back to you if you'd like to describe those.
Go ahead, Jesus.
Okay.
So in my situation, the only white wine that we are making right now is a white Tempranillo. Okay. So it was this is much more newer varietal. Okay. 1988, it was a mutation in one of the vines in Rioja. University of La Rioja went over there and tried to make like a viable plant or a viable vine. And from there, in my situation, we do not have a lot of experience with it. Our first main vintage, it was in 2017. In the market currently, we have the 2018. And we are thinking that those wines are gonna be aging like really good. So I do not have a lot of experience in Viura in the winemaking part. I have experience with Viura in the wine growing part, which is, I have a little bit of experience, but I've never made any kind of like Viuras.
Got it. Gloria, how about you and experience with Viura?
Actually, Viura is the main grape that we use in our whites. actually, funny enough, our white monopole it was the first white brand registered in Spain. So that's it's kind of like the heritage of the whites coming in one wine. It's a great variety, actually, to be honest. I think that I never found anybody so far that doesn't like Viura. We produce it in two styles, in Cune, the monopole, that is 100% Viura, stainless steel deposits, super fresh and beautiful, which is, if I found the grape in this style, like stainless steel, with no influence in oak, even though it benefits greatly and deeply from oak aging too. It's a variety that falls in the middle of Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay. It has the acidity, the minerality, the citric notes of Sauvignon Blanc, and a little bit of the weight and the batter finish, the beautiful aromas of also Chardonnay. So it brings together both consumers that in the US, it's super remarked. It's like, oh, you like Chardonnay or you are Sauvignon Blanc drinker. It's like people get really differentiated in ordering white wines. Yeah. And I'm finding that I'm talking about monopole because the one that I have, but Viura falls right in the middle and everybody loves it. Also, we produce a wine, a Viura that ages in oak. Again, it's a variety that really, really benefits from it.
So it's interesting you mentioned Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay sort of in your description of Viura or stylistic, but we mentioned in the introduction that actually Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay are now permitted. So are you planning on utilizing those two varieties at Cune?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware so far.
I think you'll probably be the first to know. So, and then what is for both of you? What is your opinion on that? Do you think that this will enhance the reputation? Do you think that allowing those two will make it a broader appeal to consumers, or what impact do you think that change of law will really have? Jesus, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think that Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc are more well-known globally varietals. I'm not sure if we are allowed in Rioja to make like 100% varietal on those ones. I think that we are allowed to use it to potentiate or try to blend with the other varietals.
Yes.
I think it will help, and it is good to have a little bit of varietals.
Yep. Okay. Well, I see questions coming in, lots about oak actually, but we'll go back to that. So, but I think we should pause for a moment because I'm sure everyone is thirsty. I know I am. And Gloria, let's start with your wine. So we have the 2015 Reserva. And there's actually a question about vintages in the chat. So I would love if you could sort of describe your method of production here, but specifically speak to the 2015 vintage.
Can you repeat? Sorry, you cut a little bit.
Oh, yes. I was saying, would you please describe the method of production, the winemaking that goes into this wine, but also could you speak specifically to the 2015 vintage?
Well, 2015 vintage was a great vintage for us. Cune, I'm going to speak a little bit about what Cune is in the end and how we produce the wines, and more specifically about this Cune Reserva. Cune, it's how we started. It's our origins since 1879, this brand in here. And we produce a crianza. We don't produce a young wine. It's the entry level that we produce is a crianza. Then we produce also Reserva and a Gran Reserva. We have other wines that we produce and other wineries inside the umbrella. But this is our origins, the start, the most, let's say, Rioja 101 that we produce, mainly American oak. We use used barrels so that the influence of oak is not as big in this wine in specific. What we're trying to find about this wine, it's always fruit first. So we want balance between the fruit and the oak. Actually, if you taste it, you're going to have a lot of beautiful fruit aromas coming up your nose first. Because of the aging, it ages. I'm sure that you're familiar with the aging requirements in Rioja. But in order to be a Reserva, this changed recently, a few years ago. It has to be 1.5 years in oak and 1.5 years in bottle before it's released. There's a lot of people that still think that you only need 1 year in oak, but no, you need a year and a half in oak and a year and a half in bottle before it's released, with a total of 3 years. Those are minimums, but then every single winemaker can do basically whatever they want, you know, to put style into the wine, always keeping in mind the minimums. With Cune, we always stick to the minimums. We want wines that are early released, fruit, fresh, but also ready to drink. Again, with beautiful integration with fruit and oak. Beautiful dark fruit, that the red fruit that you could find, for instance, in the crianza, evolved into beautiful dark fruit and a little bit of ripe fruit that you can find actually. If you smell it at first, it's a little bit of like marmalade going on, some dried fruit also, but still super fresh and fruity and beautiful, right? It definitely has a influence of oak into the wine, but again, it's really, really balanced with the fruit. Again, the 2015 vintage was excellent. With Cune, we tend to actually skip vintages. Well, not with Cune, with the Imperial, which is the higher end wine that we produce inside of Cune, we tend to skip vintages. It wasn't one of the best vintages what we found in our hands, but again, with in the areas that we have Cune located, normally if the vintage is going to be great with Cune, we tend to have a little bit of higher some outstanding. If the vintage is going to be very good, it's going to be outstanding. It's good, very good. This wine, actually, the Cune Crianza and the Cune Reserva, is something that surprised me a lot. It's one of the hardest wines that you can find, that the winemaker Maria, by the way, 100% female winemaking team, something that I'm really proud for obvious reasons. It's one of the hardest for her to produce. With Cune, we always try to be consistent between vintages. Even though we have other ones that we like to show the vintage, in the case of Cune, the Cune brand itself, we always try to be consistent, and that is what makes it harder. I don't know if I'm talking too much. Am I talking too much?
So, well, there's several great questions in the Q&A, so I will address those, I promise, for those of you at home. But you mentioned consistency across vintages. So that's an interesting point, though. So, you know, how much does vintage variation affect the wines of Rioja?
It does, actually. It is
a lot.
Yes, it does a lot. That's why actually trying to get these wines really consistent between vintages, it makes the wines to be the hardest one for Maria to produce. It is crazy. Actually, I don't know why I was surprised, but I was. In the end, we are the producers of the one that won the #1 of the top 101 Spectator, Imperial. You would always, and actually 2004 was the first vintage that Maria produced on her own as head of winemaking. So you would always think that a wine like that would be the most difficult wine for her to produce, but no, it was all about the hard part of trying to have a wine that is consistent between vintages like Cune is. So yes, it definitely affects a lot.
Okay, thank you. And he's just sort of along those lines, and then of course I want to taste your beautiful wine as well. But talking about, you know, vintage variation, what are some of the specific geographic elements that impact the wines of Rioja and perhaps the vintages of Rioja as well?
So Rioja, we are very lucky with the geography that we have. In the north, we do have the Sierra Cantabria. These mountains protect us from the Atlantic influence. And there is a very cool effect over there that is called the Foehn effect. This effect traps the clouds against the mountains. And that is a very typical picture in Rioja, okay?
A beautiful one.
Yeah. I mean, you know, from Cune, you can see that perfectly. So in our situation, as you see the picture of my background, this is facing south, okay? So In the south, we have these mountains. That one is San Lorenzo, is the highest mountain in La Rioja. Okay, and that is protecting as well from some of the colder area coming from the south. So kind of we are protected in the north and in the south. It's very similar situation that in Bordeaux, that you have like the mountains protecting from the influence of the ocean. So we are very lucky with that part. Unfortunately, we are suffering other kind of problems, such as hail. Lately, a couple of weeks ago or last week, we did have lots of rain. Some areas, they were a little bit flooded. So we have to fight with those kind of things. But with the geography, I mean, we are really lucky that we have in the north, the Sierra Cantabria, and in the south, these other mountains. So kind of protect the vines a lot.
I see. Well, let's taste your wine, and then I'm going to pose a question in the Q&A to you. Let's see. You'll have to forgive me. I'm normally I do these from home, but I'm in a New York hotel, so I might have mentioned to our panelists before we started. So my glassware is a little bit lacking here today. But certainly it will not impact your beautiful wine. But why don't you tell us what we're tasting? And again, there was a question about these vintages specifically, so if you could address that as well, Jesus.
So in our situation, Gloria was saying like she was explaining and describing really good the differences between Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva. As she was saying, like for example, for Cune, they were like sticking into the minimums. For us, it's exactly the opposite. So for example, for this Crianza that we are tasting, this is a 2010. Okay, that was an excellent vintage. And what we do in this situation, I think we did have like for at least 1 year in barrel the wine. And after that, we kept another year in bottle. So that is a little bit of a difference. The tasting notes that we get, we try to have like a very perfumed wine. The blackberry, the cherries, a little bit of liquorized notes. And I think that for a 2010 is still keeping like beautiful. I think that it is a really good wine.
That leads me to the question it's in the Q&A, but I wanted to pose to you. And you mentioned towards the beginning about the wines aging well and aging gracefully. But the question is really why? What about Rioja allows it to age so gracefully?
Could you repeat that question again, please?
Yes. We're talking about how the wines of Rioja, the red wines of Rioja, have the ability to age very gracefully. But can you explain why? Why is that?
I'm not sure about that answer. I mean, I think that Tempranillo is a really good varietal to age. And I think that impacts a lot in the final blend. That's kind of like the main answer to that.
Well, all the indigenous grapes from Rioja add a lot of that, actually. Graciano, it's another key point of the long aging in oak and the long aging in bottle. Every single grape that it's blended into these wines has a beautiful key part. And in the end, the acidity, it's really pronounced. It has a lot of like characters and aromas and body and structure, but without being overwhelming. All of them, it just add a beautiful factor into every single wine produced in Rioja. And yeah, also in the end, the influence of everything influences. It's not about also the grapes, the geography, as Jesus was explaining, is a key part of everything. The convergence between the Atlantic and Mediterranean climate, it's a key point also of Rioja. The terroir, that every single plot is super rich in different styles of terroir, and actually that's why we're moving towards having a recognition plots in a lot of that. A lot of wineries are trying to get that recognition in the wines. Everything makes this wine region exceptional, from like everything. It's a key part.
There's a question actually in the chat about the river, about the Ebro River and the impact that
That's
has.
another factor, definitely, that influences the climate.
And can you explain, like, in what way and what impact would that have on the growing, and then what you might expect in the glass?
Jesus?
So for example, thank you. So one, impacts in the soil mainly. So we see like two major difference in soils. One of them is more sandy, the other one is more clay. Okay, so what I see, it is like in one side of the Ebro River we are seeing more sandy areas, and in another one we are seeing more clay. So as you can imagine, in the terroir, that impacts a lot in the wine. With the difference in vintages, you can see that. So if one vintage, it gets more rain, the sandy areas are a little bit better, or the vineyards in the sandy areas tends to have a better quality grapes than in the clay areas, because the clay tends to collect more the water. And I mean, there are always like these kind of like differences. But yes, the Ebro River impacts a lot.
Okay. So Jesus, I'd like to stick with you for a moment. This is not on the topic that we were just discussing, but since we're chatting, so you're working on a premium Napa cab. Mm-hmm. So my question is, living and working in Napa, what have you learned from Napa? What do you think that Rioja as a region, as a wine growing region, could learn from Napa, and sort of vice versa? What do you think that Rioja does better than Napa that we could learn from them?
So that's a tricky one.
That's why you're here.
So I will say, I don't know, first thing that popped up to my mind, it is like Napa, I see lots and lots of small high-end producers, versus in Rioja, I don't see that. What Rioja can learn from Napa, I will say that is part of it. And what Napa should be learning from Rioja is patience. I do understand that they have a high demand for all the wines. They want to sell the wine as soon as it is ready, but it gets a little bit difficult for me to purchase this year a wine that I cannot drink in the next 10 years, or that I should be keeping. And actually, I never keep them because I opened them before. That's kind of like my input in
well,
Napa.
actually, it's a great input. I think it's the key factor of all this. Every time that I'm doing a wine dinner with, for instance, wines like Imperial, the Continuos that we have, that is basically one of the parts of my speech. When a Rioja producer releases a wine, for instance, by the way, fantastic, your wine, El Céntimo 2010. It's an excellent vintage also, so thank you for it. When a Rioja producer releases a wine, we release it when the wine is ready to be drunk. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that the wine has to be drunk at that exact time. Actually, a lot of these wines are made in order to last long and to evolve beautifully for decades. Mm-hmm. However, when we release a wine, again, like Jesus was saying, with patience, and when the wine is ready, we release it when the wine is ready to start to be consumed. And that's a huge difference. And that's actually why I think there's been, within the last few years, a beautiful shift towards the wines from Rioja and towards the wines from Spain in the US market.
And Gloria, sticking with you just for a moment, and since we're talking about Napa, I'll just continue to use the comparison. But we're of course quite used to seeing a single vineyard on a label from the wines that we produce here. But now with your Viñedos Singulares, and again, forgive my pronunciation, but how many producers do you think will adopt this sort of single vineyard labeling? And I've heard sort of differing opinions, like so much of Rioja is based on the blending of different sites. So
I mean, I don't know how many producers are going to adopt this. I think that Viñedos Singulares, it's going to help a lot Rioja, definitely. It's definitely the way where we're going to go. In the end, like every single region, even though Rioja is one of the most strict in quality speaking in the whole world, there's different plots and different vineyards and different places where you produce better quality of wines than others. So I definitely think that that is a way to go, in order to have that distinction towards them. If a lot of us are gonna adopt that, we definitely have some wines that we are looking towards getting towards there. But it's also not something that you have for every single wine. So I don't know how many people, but it's definitely something good to have. It's definitely a way to go.
Jesus, do you agree with that?
Yes, and also I would like to say that all the rules that each of the Rioja producers needs to fulfill, they are really complicated. Very, very complicated. And to fulfill each requirement, let's say that I want to do a Viñedo Singular wine. I can't. I'm sorry. Even if I have a single vineyard, I can't, because you need to fulfill like multiple steps. It needs to be like 80 years old. You need to get like excellent vintages for the last 2 years. It requires a lot. One of the main reasons, because we label our wine as a crianza. Actually, we had the opportunity to label our wine as a reserva because we were fulfilling the minimum in time. But because I wanted to ship it here to the USA, we just labeled it as crianza. And it was going to take me like extra 3 to 4 months. So it is really tricky in Rioja. If you want to fulfill all the requirements and you need to follow all the rules from the DOC, it is difficult. And I will say that is one thing that Rioja should be learning a little bit more from Napa. You have more freedom in Napa. You kind of do whatever you want to do. In Rioja is much more structured. You can plant this. The space between the vines, it has to be this. You can prune only with these 3 different options. If you need to age the wine and you want to label it this way or this other way, you need to start. It's very complicated.
Oh, that's the beauty of it too.
It is, but it's tricky and it takes a lot of effort. Yes. It does. So, for example, in our situations, I would love to see more single vineyards or viñedos singulares, but in order to be able to have one of those labels, the requirements are very, very difficult to get.
I see. Do you think that consumers will appreciate this? Do you think that this will add more value in their eyes?
I think it does, but at the same time, it is very even for me, for myself, it's very difficult to keep track of all the information that we are sharing right now. How many months you need to have it? What are these kind of things? And all of those requirements. So when I'm trying to explain this in a tasting to the US consumers, I'm dumping as much information that I'm just saying like, enjoy the wine.
I like to keep it simple too. If not,
yeah,
it's too much.
Yeah.
It's a matter of education in the end. Like people know that Premier Cru, Grand Cru, it's good because they know it, because they had education about it. So when people know that Viñedos Singulares, it's something special, that it has a lot of effort and qualifications and little things that you need to require in order to be that. Like Rioja is already, I mean, you don't need to be a Viñedo Singular in order to have a lot of requirements and things to do. Rioja itself has a lot of those. People know that a lot more now, in the US at least. So it's, again, a matter of just education.
Yeah. Jesus, I have a question for you, and then I want to actually compliment our audience members. There are some amazing questions here, so I definitely want to leave time for that. But before we move on to those questions, could you speak a bit, Jesus, about about climate change in the region. Has there been an impact? Have you had to adjust any vineyard practices, and can we expect any sort of stylistic change in the wine?
As we were mentioning, for example, in Rioja, each vintage is very different from each other. You can get the rain, the hail, frozen vineyards like 3 or 4 years ago, like every other 10 years. So pretty much we are adapting. We are adapting to whatever is coming that year. The differences that I see, for example, here in Napa, it is like here in Napa, we have to be dealing with the smoke from the fires. Over there, we are not having those kind of problems with the fires, but we are having problems with the rain, mainly. Okay, that's kind of like what we have been facing in the last couple of weeks.
And is that different? Are those sort of like what we call weather events increasing in frequency or intensity in the region?
I think so. It's a little bit difficult for me to keep track of all of that, but
right.
Yes.
Gloria, do you have a thought on that?
I really think it's affecting. I mean, every single year that passes, it's a challenge to actually to try to preserve the acidity in the wines. So that's why there's many wineries that has to even change the blends in order to try to actually preserve that acidity in order to. Yes, it definitely affects. Like Jesus is saying, we all have to adapt in order to continue to do exceptional wines, but it's definitely something that is going on, and we don't know what the challenges of the future are going to be, definitely.
Yeah, well, you're not alone. Okay, so in our remaining minutes, I'd like to address some of the questions that have come through, which are very, very interesting. Jesus, Gloria, whoever would like to tackle these, please just jump in. So we have a question from Rick. I've seen a few producers who are now working with combination barrels, French and American oak. Is that a growing trend in Rioja?
So in my situation, that's what we are doing. I'm not sure if it's a trend or not, but that's what we are doing.
Same as Jesus. That's what we are doing. We have, in the end, we had different wineries inside the umbrella of Cune. Cune is mainly American oak, as I was explaining when I was doing the tasting, but we have other wineries like Imperial that we use 50-50. And for instance, with Contino, we wanted to move away from traditional Rioja with that specific winery, and we use mainly French oak. So it's like I was saying, it's not. I'm not sure if it's a matter of trend or what, but it's definitely what we're doing too.
Okay. Several questions about oak, actually. So Daniel would like to know, why are Rioja wines that are made with American oak or any oak considered traditional when they were only introduced 150 years ago, while we speak of the region producing wine for the past 1,000 years?
So mainly, let me take this one, Gloria, please.
Go ahead.
Mainly one of the most traditional wines made in Rioja is carbonic maceration, like what we call vino joven. And that is very popular for the local people. Okay, when we are talking, I will say that the US market doesn't know a lot about those wines because those wines are consumed locally over there. That has been kind of like when we are from the 1,000, from when we can keep track of all of this, I think that those wines, they were the carbonic maceration, where they were getting the grapes and dumping all of them together in a tank with everything, with the stems, and after the fermentation, they were pressing. That was the wine that they were making. Of course, because now we are talking about the end of the the beginning of the 1800s. That's traditional for me too. I'm sorry, we have a long history with that. So maybe sometimes we cross like traditional with something newer or something more recent. But the more recent history is starting in the 1800s. So that's kind of like my input on that one.
Okay, okay, thank you. Thank you. There are many questions about oak, actually. so slightly different take here. John wants to know, I'm going to paraphrase some of these questions, but wants to know about Hungarian oak. Is anyone using Hungarian oak in Rioja?
Sure, yeah, we are not.
We are using a little bit of it. I cannot remember which one. It's not for the Cune line. It's a little bit of, I think we use a little bit in Continuo, just a little bit. I think it's in Continuo, but yes, we definitely.
And can you speak to that a little bit? What might the difference be that a consumer would notice?
I would be lying, to be honest, in order to explain a little bit of that, because actually it's pretty recent. I think it's the last time that I went to do a visit into Cune that the winemakers in there were explaining a little bit further about it. But it was something like, oh yeah, and we're using Hungarian oak also a little bit in here. Yeah. But yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm not sure if that's a trend either. Jesus, do you think that that's a trend also to use more Hungarian oak, or?
I see more the Hungarian oak here in Napa rather than there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, a couple more questions from the Q&A. This question is from Rick. There is a trend around Spain for younger winemakers to step away from some of the more rigid traditional requirements, for example, the aging requirements of the region. Do you see this in Rioja as well?
Well, in Rioja, we have some rules that we have to follow.
I was going to say, no, I don't think so. The thing is that you can, I mean, if you're in Rioja, you have to play by the rules, period.
Mm-hmm.
As simple as that. If you want to do a young wine, just do a young wine. If you want to do a crianza, do a crianza. Yeah. And on top of all that, you can go farther away, like Jesus is doing with the Centimol, or like what we're doing with Imperial and the Continuos and the Viña Reales. But no, you have to play by the rules, definitely.
Yeah. And actually,
you cannot stick a Rioja label if you don't follow the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I suppose maybe the question is intending to ask, do you see some people maybe making wine in the region not labeling it as Rioja just because they don't want to play by any of those rules?
I would never do anything like that. To have a vineyard in Rioja is to have a lottery ticket, to be honest.
That makes sense.
If you're in Rioja, you label it as Rioja. It would be really...
I think that all of us, we are really proud to say that we are from there.
Yeah.
And all of those vineyards, right, they have been inherited from families. So that's
you don't want
important
to step away from that.
No. You want to have the jewelry that your parents and your grandparents are passing to you. You want to keep them in the best conditions that you can, and that's it.
I mean, Rioja, it's one of the most serious kind of wine regions in the whole world. Spain has different wine regions, super different, more towards IGTs, more. In the end, Rioja is denominación de origen calificada. There's a few of those in the whole world in the end.
And it was the first one in Spain. Mm-hmm. It was the first one in Spain, and we have been leading that way, the rest of the wine regions over there.
That's gold. You don't want to do anything apart from that.
Okay, so I'm going to move away from the oak questions. I know there's more that we haven't covered, but so that we can change topics to go back to varieties in the region. So Setsuka has a question. I'll paraphrase this a little bit. We spoke earlier about as blending varieties in White Rioja, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc. So the question, I think, is, do you either of you think that other varieties, whether it's those in the white wines or others in the red, will be adopted as more than just blending varieties over time?
I see a trend lately. So for example, with the Grenache, mainly the most common wines, it is like the blend that we are talking, but lately we have seen lots of like 100% varietal. In the Grenache, that's lately I've seen a lot. Graciano, I've seen some. They are not the most common ones, but yes, there are wines that there are specifically single varietals for those other ones.
But do you think that something that's not one of the traditional varieties, Tempranillo, Graciano, do you think that one day, let's say Merlot, do you think that we could see 100%?
Right now or nowadays, I don't think so, because we are allowed to use the varietals that we are allowed to use. And those new ones that they have been introduced, you can use them as a blend, as part of a blend. You cannot use them for single varietals.
Okay, and Gloria, sort of same question to you, but let's say we're, you know, transporting ourselves decades from now, and the laws, could the laws change to allow that, in your opinion?
I don't think so. No, it's a matter of what we were talking about at the very beginning. It's about tradition and everything in Rioja. And that's actually the main reason why we have all those laws, so that people keep doing what we've been doing for centuries. So every single change in Rioja, you have no idea how long has it take to change the fact of the single vineyard thing, like for a long time. So changes in Rioja are super slow because in the end, it impacts a lot. So something like that would be a huge change. I definitely don't see it coming in the short run, and maybe not even in the long run.
I don't think that in the next 20 years, we are going to see a change on that. They are very, with the rules from the DOC, they are very, very conservative. And as he was mentioning, it takes a lot of time and effort because you have to put together lots of different interests in the region. So it's kind of tricky.
Well, we're down to our last few minutes here. So I'd like to pose this to both of you, but Jesus, since we're speaking with you, if you, let's say someone was viewing tonight from home and has never tried a wine from Rioja, what should their main takeaway be? Why should they go buy a bottle of Rioja tonight?
I think that in the world, this is the best quality price wines that you can get. Just as simple as that. For the price that you are paying, I bet whatever you want that you are not going to get better quality than that.
Doesn't matter where do you want to go? If you get a crianza, a reserva, a gran reserva, doesn't matter where you go. The quality that you get for the price point is ridiculous. It's definitely, you get in masterpieces, one of the best of the kind in the whole world, for a super achievable price. That's the key point actually of Rioja and Spain as a whole in that case, but yeah, definitely.
Okay, so last question. Oh, go ahead, Jesus.
Sorry. It was first time that I moved here to the USA when I came here to Napa. It surprised me a lot what you have to pay to get a nice wine.
Yeah.
Because when I grew up, I was in the middle of Rioja, and it's very easy and kind of cheap to get good wines. It was very surprisingly for me. It was my shock.
Yes. And so last question before we sign off is, okay, so this person who's tuned in tonight, they've never bought a bottle of Rioja before. They go to their corner store, they buy a bottle of Rioja. What should they pair it with this evening?
So I really like to do like lamb chops, and today is the San Juan, which is a big festivity over there.
The longest night.
Yeah, it's the longest night during the year. So
longest day.
Sorry.
The longest day. It's the longest day. It's the longest day. Sorry, I messed you up.
So I would say like lamb chops are really, really good. And that is kind of like a traditional thing that we do in Rioja. We kind of like barbecue it with the shoots of the vine. So we pick them when we are pruning during winter, we dry them. It makes like a quick fire. So lamb chops is a really good option.
Lamb chops is definitely the pairing that we do in Rioja. Lamb, it's like super traditional dish, meat dish from the region. Great steak, just a ribeye. And also the good thing about the Riojas is that they're so balanced that even you can get beautiful fish with some, I mean, maybe not with a Gran Reserva that it will overwhelm the flavors, but with a beautiful criancita, yeah, definitely. You can have some beautiful fishes there. Can I say something else about I was
Please.
like thinking about what you said about the single varieties and the Graciano. There's some single varieties that has been tricky in order to do 100%. For instance, we do produce 100% Graciano, and we were the first ones to produce 100% Graciano, the Continuo Graciano. It's a wine that is really special. Not sure if there's not a huge availability of it, but you definitely have the chance to try it. Graciano is a key point of Rioja, and there's not always a huge chance to taste what a Graciano has to offer. And it's not always easy to find an excellent Graciano. You need to know a little bit the producers, because it's a really tricky grape that can get into too much bitterness easy. So definitely, if you have the chance to get your hands on a Continuo Graciano, I would definitely try that.
I second that. Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we're at time, because I know that there are questions that we didn't have a chance to answer. But Gloria, Jesus, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for all of you who not only tuned in from home, but who asked some pretty outstanding questions that we could have definitely spoken about more. But again, thanks everyone. If you're interested in tasting some wines from Rioja, certainly visit wineaccess.com. And until the next time, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Salud.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.